It was for this reason that I knew what my wife meant when she told me, Uxmal and Chichen Itza are offered and desecrated like a prostitute for sale. And the truth is, their official authorities do their job quite well, but it's misdirected. They use the sacred nature of the place primarily to attract tourists, but ancient disciplines are almost completely ignored. In any case, Uxmal has not lost its mantle of peace, which I call feminine on the outside and masculine on the inside, just as I call Chichen Itza masculine on the outside and feminine on the inside. La Pyramida main house was under repair and we couldn't go up. Then, the tour guide shows us the large central courtyard, where the serpent Quetzalcoatl, called Kukulkan, touches his jaws with his tail, as if closing the cycle. Americo Living Trail 433. The military and the god of water are very important to the ancient inhabitants of this place. Before 5 p.m., the tour guide led us to the depths of the ruins, and left us in front of the 9-level Great Pyramid, so we could freely climb it. The upper levels were dedicated to the Makas, considered the incarnation of Xiuhtecutli, the sun, symbol of fire and god of turquoise. This is very important, because it was used to obtain feathers for making headdresses and headdresses for ceremonial use. The headdress is also a symbol of representation. La Iluminación. I gathered the group, and, after a few exchanges, went up with them. Then, on the upper temple overlooking the entire valley, I meditated for 40 minutes. Most of them followed me. I felt Uxmal fill with light and the god Kenurchatan was very close. His silence spoke without words, as does the sun, the source of life. The scorching heat produced by the sun faded, and a gentle breeze enveloped the entire pyramid in a light drizzle. Very gentle, very subtle, very evident. And the inner voice of the owner of Uxmal, Kenurchatan, simply tells me telepathically, "So you know I am here." Some tourists, seeing us meditating here, shouted at each other, having no idea what it means to sit in the lotus flower position to meditate. And while some considered us respectable, others downright mocked us. But overall, the transformative atmosphere made everyone uncomfortable, especially the official authorities, the police, who became strangely and inexplicably anxious, and began shouting at us from the foot of the pyramid, telling us we should leave this platform, which, of course, didn't seem sacred to them. They urged us to head toward the entrance to the tourist site. I emerged from meditation, and my friends had become my guardians. With so many nervous shouts reaching me, I was trying to obey without getting angry. And while I was rubbing my legs and calves, after an hour in the lotus position, the policeman became desperate, and insisted like a madman that I obey. It was then that my wife, who is usually quiet, yelled at him angrily, "Wait, can't you see that you can't just stop and walk like that?" And I was so exasperated that I added, in a disorganized and almost hypocritical way, "I don't dislike you anyway." It was a meditation, amidst discomfort and incomprehension. By the time we left, we'd forgotten about the incident, and were happy again. We then decided to go into the local restaurant, and have a light but enjoyable meal. Some foreigners, I think they were Italian, pointed at me as the person meditating atop the pyramid. They were completely unaware of what was Americo Living Trail 434 happening on this sacred day. After lunch, we noticed people lining up, and we went to do the same, so that we could all be allowed to re-enter the archaeological site. People are taking their seats in the designated places in front of the main esplanade, where the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, had been shown to us. We were right next to the Temple of Venus. The sound and light show was about to begin. Everything was dark, and suddenly, the engineers in charge of putting on this show skillfully used the spotlights, like in a theater where only a certain area of the venue is lit, while a voice, through the microphones, explained the history of the people who lived in Uxmal. The stars shone brightly in the blue sky, and halfway through the event, in full view of everyone, a star, or rather a UFO, began to move from one end of the sky to the other. The spectacle continued and everyone thought what they thought best, regarding the mysterious path of that star in the sky, which, evidently was not programmed by human engineers, but by cosmic ones. I was pleasantly surprised, but in contrast, I admired human ignorance, when I heard some commenting that it was a satellite, others saying it was an airplane, and still others thinking it was a shooting star. But few, and at the same time, practically everyone, felt in their hearts that it was definitely a UFO. For my part, what I could be sure of was that this fact was a categorical affirmation of the presence of the arm of the Aquarius cross, knowledge, an air sign. At the end of the show, some brothers from our group wanted to go down to the plaza in this large space, where they performed the first part of the Tai movement series. This time, the authorities were tolerant, and waited for the small group, led by my disciple, to complete their sacred movements. When we left the place, we were asked to get into a van with a special driver, as it was a van just for us, since there were no other tourists taking our route back to our hotel. During the journey, I had the opportunity to share some of my experience with them. For example, I always wanted to solve the mystery of woman, and when I realized it was infinite, I also came closer to the practice that made it cease to be a mystery. To Chichen Itza, America Living Trail, 435. It was almost midnight when we arrived at our hotel, and we went directly to the reception to prepare the paperwork and payment for the tour that would depart the next day to Chichen Itza, which means the mouth of the Well of the Water Wizards. I told my brothers that the discipline I had taught them was essential, because without meditation and hatha yoga, evolution is impossible. I explained to them that after this visit to the sacred center, they would be left with the responsibility of truly being priestesses, and their brother, a guru. Of course, whether they are or not depends on their actions, since everything is designed so that each person is responsible and free without being pressured by the instructor. Early the next day, we were waiting for the hired tour van, and we were starting to get worried when it finally arrived. During the journey, this time the sisters were able to provide me with some leather sandals, which they sold on the outskirts of this archaeological site. They also bought some for my brother and disciple. The tour guide, who was supposed to lead us through the archaeological site, was restless, enthusiastic, and even fanatical, and this was evident as he taught us about the Chichen Itza ruins. At one point, he said that those who wanted to go to the cenote could do so. He pointed us toward the wide, dirt path on the left. And then he set us free. We continued toward the back of the area along the causeway for those who would dine the cenote, and finally arrived at a vast place that looked like a deep lake, where swimming was impossible. This was the sacred cenote, where those who were to be sacrificed to the gods, mainly women and children, were supposedly sacrificed. In ancient times, they were thrown into these seemingly bottomless waters. I was gazing at this mysterious lake, about which the tour guide and others commented that many precious stones were found at the bottom, and that it had been plundered more than once by ambitious and powerful men after the conquest of Mexico. Some bought the entire area, including the pyramid, and after degrading it, sold it. But once again, as throughout our pilgrimages, an unusual event took place, which, like each one of them, was unique. This occurred while I was looking toward this cenote, pondering its mysteries of blood and precious jewels. Then, a beautiful, snow-white bird that appeared to be a heron appeared from the right side of the water, and flew over it, moving freely toward the left side of the cenote. It wasn't such a small bird, so one of the sisters in my group looked at me in amazement at what was happening, as if searching my eyes for an answer. Because despite not knowing what was happening, I read in my student's expression that she sensed a particularly sacred sign behind this simple and singular event. America Living Trail, 436. Where did such a beautiful creature come from at this very cosmic moment? It was the only supremely white bird that flew over the cenote. Then, within me, the powerful desire was reaffirmed that this place would no longer be classified as a place of virgin sacrifice, but rather as the place of supreme enlightenment for all high initiates and their eternal feminine. Indeed, I remembered that the Sublime Master, as he approached the end of his pilgrimages to India, and then to Tibet, was visited by Paramahansa or Ahimsa, which means, I'm what I am. It was on that journey that the Master saw the white swan, showing him that the sannyasi, even though he travels the world, no longer stains his garment. When I managed to recover from my amazement, we began our return journey. We agreed that it was no longer safe to follow the tour guide, so we returned alone to the central part of the archaeological site. As we left the Avenue of the Dead, I saw the imposing and quite tall main pyramid, almost like the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. But it would be impossible to climb it, except from the front, and this didn't seem useful enough. Then I stood there thinking, looking toward the temple of Venus, dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, next to the enormous Chacmol, which the group took a great liking to. Climbing this temple was prohibited, as indicated by certain signs and a fragile wire fence. But only because of the extremely sacred nature of the moment and the need to activate something that I don't know exactly what it was, I decided, from the bottom of my heart, that we should take, by assault, said small pyramid temple, especially because I remembered that Quetzalcoatl at the end of his mission, returns to Venus and then, becomes the morning star. A fact that, suddenly, had me irresistibly attracted. There was no time to try to initiate official procedures, as is advisable. The wonderful temple of Venus of Quetzalcoatl was here, and I had recently read about the profound relationship between Venus and Quetzalcoatl. And love was the greatest force moving me at that moment. So I gathered the brothers, and told them about this emerging plan. They trusted their master. We immediately took our respective places around this pavilion, and at a given moment, we began to raise it in a swift, synchronized, and lightning-fast manner. The brothers behaved up to the task, trusted me, and stoically passed this test of fire, following me in my endeavors. But on the steps facing the path leading to the sacred cenote, the sister of the pink lightning bolt was surprised by the policeman, who not only prevented her from ascending, but, upon noticing our impertinent ascent, ascended this way himself, almost as quickly as we did, fulfilling the mystery that didn't seem so mysterious to him. The authorities closed, for a very different reason, the circuit that activated the temple of Quetzalcoatl Venus. The officer was really annoyed, and was already up there, in front of us. The sister with the pink lightning bolt, a little scared and saddened by having failed her mission, followed the policeman, having gone up with him. But the power of the moment was such, that we felt neither fear nor annoyance, so ignoring the scolding and the tirade he was giving us, I said to the siblings with a stronger authority, Americo Living Trail 437, hold hands. And so we did, just as the police officer somehow made physical contact, joining this energy circuit, and the small sprinkles of water that had begun to fall from the moment we decided to climb this temple suddenly turned into a torrent of rain. When the police tried to get us off, I said to them, let him bring us down on the side we didn't touch when we went up, so that the energy is completed. I was referring to the side where the policeman climbed. That point faces the causeway leading to the cenote where we saw the Ahimsa. Something was changing in the history of Chichen Itza. As if that causeway of the dead and crucified had become the causeway of resurrection. We stopped touching each other and reluctantly began to descend with the policeman. The water falling wasn't just any water, but a purifying, warm, and highly spiritual water. We could think of the water of Aquarius, the Son of Man, purifying everyone, good and bad, including the pyramids and monuments. The policeman became inflexible, and his annoyance would not be appeased, as if a part of him felt that he had been used by the New Age water witches, the magicians of the spirit, transmuters of the emotional into the spiritual. Was it training, because we were here, and we made it rain by being here? Was it training, because we made it rain, or was it going to rain anyway with or without us? But the strangest thing of all is, that this place was called Chichen Itza, the mouth of the well of the water sorcerers. Besides, what was a living path doing at this very moment, with his disciples, in this sacred place? The police officer met up with his colleague, and instructed him to lead us to the entrance, to expel us from Chichen Itza. We had violated the rules. As this new, younger officer walked ahead of us, leading us toward the exit, the water became more and more free, and then I said to my brothers who were closest to me, in a prophetic tone, before we get to the exit, he'll regret kicking us out, because he's receiving this holy water. Some of the group, including my wife, were very rebellious, and wanted to see more of the sacred tourist site. They were mainly eager to head inside the tallest pyramid, which I had previously considered unsuitable for climbing. People were already lining up to get in. Americo Living Trail 438. The idea of visiting the interior of the pyramid was to see the throne of the high priest, which was displayed there. My wife didn't even ask my permission, but my other sister did. And they escaped from the group of prisoners, attempting their objective. Unfortunately, perhaps because of the rain, they weren't allowed to access. 20 steps further on, heading towards the exit, the policeman stops, looks at me and says, "Suffering. I have to do this, because they did something they shouldn't have." To console him add, "Okay, I understand, you are the authority and you have to do your duty, do it." Then I remembered that this was the same thing Mahatma Gandhi said to the young officer in charge of leading him to the cell, after he was wrongly accused of something he didn't do. This attitude moved the heart of the guard of Chichen Itza and he added, "I'm going to let you go, but don't do things you shouldn't," he begged us. "Okay and thank you." Once freed, I felt so happy at the precision of the human and mystical acts I saw happening in perfect harmony. As I filled myself with the celestial water, I opened my arms to receive it, almost jumping for joy, and wishing all the tourists could feel what I was feeling. It was as if my body had the privilege of being in direct contact with my spirit for a few moments. So, as I allowed myself to be drenched in this water, I said with great joy to the brothers standing next to me, who, with astonished expressions, tried to understand what was happening, even though they sensed it in their hearts. "Enjoy this water, which is purification. Let yourselves be wet." I looked at the main pyramid, but I couldn't seem to head towards it and up, because something told me that everything was already over. After about 20 minutes, the rain stopped. And so, wet and all, we wandered around the crafts market at the entrance to the Chichen Itza archaeological site. Many other tourists were also soaked and very happy. And we joked about this and that. Then I remembered the policeman who had brought us up to the temple. And I made fun of him, by saying that once we were up there, while he was getting angry, I would say to them, "Hey, you guys grab him," while I put the orders cross on him, for being part of the important work we're doing. Americo Living Trail 439. 439. How I made faces, and laughed out loud, gesticulating with my movements the event. They couldn't stop getting excited like children getting into mischief. Rarely, as in these moments, have I seen them without the personality masks and adult conflicts. A little later, the time agreed upon in the tour program arrived. So, the rest of the group gathered to board the tour bus that would take us to the restaurant. As I said, I thought it was part of the contract, or at least that's what we and those serving us understood. We arrived at a huge restaurant, which could have comfortably accommodated perhaps 1,500 people. The tables were long, served by a multitude of waiters. The whole place seemed to radiate happiness. It was like a huge party with people arriving in trucks from various tours and hotels, all with the sole purpose, I thought, of sharing a large buffet in honor of this closing of the 7 sacred pilgrimages. It had happened to me before, for example, around 1998, during the last session we had in the apartment near Villa de los Flores, where we were meeting with the newly formed pilot group. When we left, many neighbors were setting up tarps, tables, and chairs, preparing for a big party in the large patio of these condos. Surely, this wasn't to say goodbye, but perhaps because a very dear neighbor was getting married. But it was clear to me that the party was for us, because they also started playing Enigma at full volume, that melody that is so meaningful to me. In short, when one lives in one's center, without exaggerating, truly incredible things happen, but not everyone can manage to be objective and balanced enough to accurately see God in what surrounds them. The truth is that the more than 1,000 people were moving all over the place. Some formed long lines, which moved quickly, to enjoy the food they wanted at this massive buffet of exquisite variety. Now it seemed as if everyone knew what was happening at Cosmos and Chichen Itza. Afterwards, putting 2 and 2 together, we realized that our group hadn't actually paid to attend this culinary feast as part of the tour. So we ate for free. It was evident that the divinity had made the necessary arrangements for this gift to be given to us. All of Merida was bathed by that water, and when we arrived at the hotel it was still not dark, so we prepared for a fraternal, group teaching session before going swimming in the hotel pool on this special night. Meeting with the group, he tried to explain the momentous events we were experiencing on this final pilgrimage. I opened the door laudably and he said, "You cannot be yes and no, you are yes, God is yes. Americo Living Trail 440. If I had any doubts about what we were doing, it was no longer possible to cultivate them with these kinds of messages. I remember then, what I wrote in the book Christline. You cannot love and not love, be and not be, live and not live. I understood that I am is not the person, but our being, and that, therefore, I cannot doubt the sacred signs that are guiding me. The pilgrimage we were undertaking is, and cannot not be. It is mystical, scientific, Neptunian, Uranian. It was like the man who dreamed he was a butterfly, and upon waking up didn't know if he was now a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly who dreams he's a man. And then, you can only discover the truth by practicing the truth. Thus, I find myself culminating the seventh movement, in the privilege of carrying out on the planet the cross of the Son of Man, who is in heaven at this very moment, and who was prophesied millennia ago. At least, I realized my dream in the paradise of my path of roses without thorns, and Neptune symbolizes this eternal vacation. That night, I swam in the pool, assuming the lotus position in the water. I was able to float in the water simply by controlling my breathing. I remained relaxed for at least half an hour. My disciple tried again and again, unsuccessfully, until he became annoyed, and jokingly slapped me, and left the water to rest, along with the women. Meanwhile, I continued trying to control my inner world. The restaurant was right next to the pool, and when I got out of the swim, the group was already there, the waiters taking their orders, while live music began to liven up the evening. The sisters were so happy they wanted to dance. Time passed quickly, and after about 2.5 hours, we each headed back to our rooms. The next day, the morning was pleasant, the sun filled us with its gentle warmth, and the rich water in this tub in our home, shared with my wife, made me feel that I had fulfilled my duty. Once ready, we headed out to the main room, and the brothers, as agreed, began to appear. We didn't fully understand how this whole visit to Merida business was going to end, but what we did know was that we were now headed toward another sacred place they had recommended to us, and that it was said to be called Zubelchalton. All these pilgrimages were definitely like a lightning bolt from Uranus, an extraordinary ray embedding itself in the time-space of human history. Americo Living Trail 441. The Tibetan master was right when he told me that I was going to start living 7x7 in time-space, and that would not mean I was going to age physically. All the trips we took were within this sensitivity of time and space, as if in a compressed time. And the one to Merida was the one I felt most strongly, truly like the lightning bolt that transitions from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. What loving and special people these people from Merida are. I don't know if you can understand it, but you gave me something invaluable these past few days. This Sunday, designated as a rest day, fluidity would lead us through the land test heading towards Puerto Progreso. The morning was pleasant, the sun bathing us with its gentle warmth. We walked through the city center, and headed toward the bus stop for the public transportation buses that go to Puerto Progreso Beach. Visit to Zubelchalton. As we travel through the city, still in the public transport van, I'm struck by the writing on the wall of a house, in hoc signos vinces, which, as far as I can understand, means, by the sign of Och you will conquer. I remember that Solomon's talisman for Sunday is governed by Och, okay. I locate it in my personal notebook, and entrust myself to him. The truck stops on the highway, halfway to Puerto Progreso, to allow us to get off, and continue our journey, in our effort to visit Zubelchalton, which means place, where there is writing on the stones. There's no public transportation on this road, in fact, hardly any vehicles pass by either. So we walk for almost an hour, but everyone is happy, and suddenly I notice one of the sisters stopping a pickup truck, to ask for a ride, so we can get closer to our destination. The driver agrees, and since there's not enough room for everyone here, we also flag down an old car that luckily appears, and takes the rest of us. That's how, in a few minutes, we arrive at the gates of Zubelchalton. We entered the archaeological site, and after touring a few sites, I invited you to join us for a hatha yoga session in one of the largest pyramid temples located in the main plaza. They aren't very large pyramids, but they still hold the energy of ancient ceremonies. We finished our hatha yoga session, and I still struggle to absorb the power of this place. We walked along a wide path toward the Temple of the Seven Dolls, which I prefer to call the Temple of the Seven Virgins, where women become goddesses. Americo Living Trail 442. As we walk along this more or less abandoned path, before reaching the temple, we stumble upon an old stone, which is a not too large phallic symbol, and little by little, we all embrace it with respect, and it seems to acquire something special, as if it were activated by our embrace. Before ascending to the Temple of the Virgins, he asked the women in the group, if any of them still had any attachments in their lives, for example, to their children and personal belongings. He added, because if that's the case, it's better not to do it, at least not as participants in a group ritual. This isn't a game, but rather a manipulation of energies, which can give each of us a lot, but we must take responsibility. Of course, they are excited, and decide to give themselves over to la mission climbing this temple. This, of course, was going to accelerate an energy in their lives, which would be presented in a series of events, which most would not be able to resist. The energy was excessive, given the cosmic moment we were living, and the sacred places we had been touching, throughout 7 pilgrimages, at a speed that far exceeded what any ordinary human is capable of transmuting in such a short time. We climbed this mysterious, ruined temple with its well-disguised spiral structure. We held hands in the center, to seal our pact of universal love. Finally, we returned along the semi-abandoned path, and reached the main square where we practiced yoga. But we heard shouts of joy in the distance to the left. So, driven by a sense of anticipation, we decided to take a look, and behind the small hill, we found a small cenote where it was possible to swim. There, several families and small groups of friends were splashing around and sharing happily. We did the same, and we were filled with an indescribable energy despite how small this cenote seemed. It's as if we were drinking the water of life through the pores of our skin. At one point, I stepped back a bit, and tried to meditate to Puerto Progreso. It was already past noon, when we decided we should continue on our way to Playa Progreso. We dressed, shouldered our backpacks, and headed back toward the highway. Once again, we realized the need for transportation, that would take us to the main road. After about 20 minutes, a pickup truck passes by, and the sisters openly signal for it to stop. The driver stares at us, and then decides to take us toward the main road. After a 15-minute walk, we arrive, and here we have to try to catch another bus. There's quite a crowd heading to Puerto Progreso, and we have to wait for a Americo Living Trail 443 while until the sisters, who hadn't stopped trying to find a ride, flagged down an open-top pickup truck from the back. It's a family going for a trip to Playa Progreso. The parents are in the front, and their 2 or 3 teenage children are in the back. The father asks us to get in the back with the youngsters. Since we are outdoors, it allows us to enjoy the view at all times. One of the boys is a lively and cheerful teenager, and when she realizes we're from Mexico City, she becomes quite outgoing, trying to appear older, so we can tell her a lot about life. Her fresh, confident smile makes me think of the young women of Mérida and their unique charisma. Meanwhile, as if we had a special power, a cloud laden with water soon begins to accompany us from the sky, and in less than 3 minutes it begins to rain heavily, but as if by magic, after 5 minutes, the rain disappears, and the sun rises again with all its natural force. We're chatting animatedly with the young girl, about 17 years old, and as the truck jumps sharply, and we land on the floorboards, I seriously assure the teenager it's baptism. Because first we get wet, and then, the spanking. But we don't cry, she acts to play along. We don't cry, because we're grown up now, I answered. We laughed heartily. As we get closer to the place, I discover that the beach looks like a carnival, because it's vacation time, or maybe, simply because it's a holiday. In reality, the place is huge, and it's hard to find parking. It seems like a formidable party stretching for miles along the seashore. There are plenty of restaurants and street vendors. Once the man manages to get very close to the beach, we thank him, and the sisters immediately agree to offer him a little money in exchange for his services. He gladly accepts. We're hungry, and the whole atmosphere is contagious with its joy, so we make our way through the din and head for one of the beachside restaurants. We choose one, which is inevitably also right in the middle of so many people. The vacation atmosphere is definitely a very positive effect, even when it comes to a sacred mission. We ate amid jokes and strong teachings, especially for the sisters, directed at their sensitive needs. After finishing our meal, we continued along the beach, and after perhaps 2 kilometers of walking, we reached the end of the beach with its endless carnival. Americo Living Trail 444. This is where we decided to camp, so we could wade into the sea, which, unfortunately, is a bit dirty, an undeniable sign of human degeneration. Still, we tried to rest. Some of our brothers wade into the sea, and when my wife and I deem it appropriate, we enter the water together. The act, just like on the shores of Tajin, becomes sacred. As if this Caribbean water and we were consolidating the kind of white magic pact. It's not just my imagination. Despite wanting to express everything with humility, in actions like this, things become sublime. Perhaps because, whenever she enters the water with me, she seems to become emotionally one with that element. The brothers are having fun, while the two of us deposit our small lock of hair, joined together, in this Caribbean sea. I remember Lady Mercedes very much, and the violet triangle of the Caribbean, which, as I said, is, as I understand it, the New Jerusalem. This is one of the reasons why I long to touch the sea of the sacred land of Yucatan. As soon as we had placed our hair together, our beings, hers and mine, came into deep contact. Then, we let the waves of the beach water caress us, while we smeared our bodies with this wet sand. It's not yet dark, and we begin our return journey. We walk into the city, and as we do, we start asking for information about where the transportation to downtown Mérida departs. And so, after walking about 20 blocks, we arrive at the designated place. But we get an unexpected surprise, because the people here are as poor as the middle class in Mexico City or many countries around the world. There's a huge line of people waiting for public transportation. It stretches for several blocks. This brings me face to face with the other side, where I can see the real Mérida, with the enormous needs of its people. It was hard to be foolish about the poverty in which the people live. They love these beaches as the only bastion that brings a bit of joy to their lives of slavery. And if it was already overpopulated now, what would happen to this blessed land in a few years? I thought. Because I knew and felt that it was a good land and people, although already somewhat corrupt. The sisters agree and decide to split the cost, renting a shared van just for us, like a taxi service. This is how we return to our hotel. The streets of Mérida were almost empty, and the taxi dropped us off at our hotel door. How curious. I began to think. The hotel is called the Pan American Games, right when the closing ceremony of the so-called Pan American Games is taking place in Winnipeg, Canada. So, I said to my brothers, as above, so below. The sports games are held, which humanly unite the American people with fraternal bonds, while we, in a mystical or celestial aspect, arrive at the Pan American Hotel. Furthermore, bread is the staple food of all. Americo Living Trail 445 peoples in general, because wheat is the gold of all cereals, and bread contains, in the process of its preparation, components in triunity, reminiscent of the Holy Trinity. In this case, fire is the Father, flour is the Son, and water is the Holy Spirit. Pan-Americans refer, in this sense, to the resurgence of food for America. That is why Christ offered bread to his disciples, as if it were his own body. I finished this brief explanation, and began to meditate on some things, such as, for example, when we arrived from Mexico City to Mérida, I did so dressed in a suit as I was taught, with the idea of conducting myself with the dignity of a New Age emissary. Before retiring to our rooms, we agreed to rest for a couple of hours at the hotel, and then head out to downtown Mérida that Sunday night to the center of Mérida. As the time drew near, I wanted to make myself presentable, and this time, my brothers seemed to understand the importance and dignity of dressing appropriately, since we would be returning to Mexico early the next day. I wore a white suit, and my wife also wore light, elegant clothes. When I arrived at the hotel reception, I was pleased to see the women in my group well-groomed, that is, in clothes worthy of women in the process of eternal youth. The brother, and his girlfriend, who is also a priestess of the group, were taking a while to show up, so we decided to have them meet us in downtown Mérida, which was only about 4 blocks from our hotel. We began walking through these streets, spreading our ecstasy to them. The water from the recent rain trickled down the sides of the streets into the gutters, as it had rained so hard while we were in Playa Progreso. But now the rain had stopped, and the whole place was in bliss. Perhaps this is how every Sunday is for these people. The fact is that on this day, special events and street grape harvesting events were offered as attractions for the people. On the right side of the main square in downtown Mérida, there is a small plaza. Right next to the monument La Maternidad is a large church. Although it was closed, one of its large stained glass windows revealed the image of Jesus Christ, uncrucified. This caught my attention, mainly because a few meters from the main entrance to the church, the Mayan countryman had set up his street vendor's stall, offering tourists his snail shells, the kind you blow into to make a mysterious and sacred sound, so transcendent and appreciated in indigenous Mexican dances. A very important symbol for those who know, and they blow them on special dates, to establish a deep connection with the cosmos. Americo Living Trail 446. I'd never touched a snail before, but I knew that when you touched one you had to do it 4 times, once toward each cardinal point. So I decided to try my luck. My 2 spiritual sisters and disciples were examining some clothing items at the nearby street vendors to see if they would buy them, while my wife also began to do the same. For my part, I approached this Mayan man, a naturally friendly and humble person, and I asked him to show me the snails. There were many sizes, large and small. I felt as if I were in shock, unable to grasp what was happening within my true self. He told me to try playing it, even though it wouldn't be easy. I did so with gusto, and, incredibly, learned to play it in less than 5 minutes. Although some passers-by, sensitive to the sound, were bothered by my screams, and didn't look kindly upon me when they walked by, the countryman was surprised, then pleased with my achievements. With all due respect and a clumsiness that quickly disappeared, I began to blow it in all 4 directions, trying several shells of different sizes. The experience is indescribable, because an enormous joy began to vibrate through every one of my physical, emotional, and mental cells. The sound carried throughout the main square in downtown Mérida. I found myself here among the people, engaged in a simplified sacred act. Immediately this whole experience became one with the inner voice that told me clearly from within me, "You're waking up, America." I knew perfectly well what he was referring to. The pilgrimages, carried out throughout Mexico, were coming to a close. There were only 3 days left until August 11, 1999. This inner message filled me with profound surprise and indescribable personal and cosmic fulfillment. I had been a special instrument for a task to which I myself bow with respect and love. I knew it was the final seal that was telling me, mission accomplished. The Mayan seemed to sense the significance of the matter, in which he also played a part, as an instrument of cosmic forces far beyond ordinary human understanding. He immediately began to explain to me that preparing conch shells for sounding was a Mayan secret. Those who dedicate themselves to this practice base their work on the number 6 and the spiral of the screw. You have to know how to make the cut correctly for the sound to be perfect, or at least possible. After this momentous and natural act, one of the sisters stares at me persistently, unsure what to give me, because she's so happy, and asks, "Do you need any snails, Master?" Americo Living Trail 447. Since he didn't answer, I continued, "Choose whichever you want." Actually, all 3 of them wanted to buy the snail, and the inner voice speaks inside me. "These 3 women belong to you, they are yours." I realized that he referred to them as disciples, among whom was my own wife. I decided to buy the largest snail, and after saying goodbye to my snail friend, I walked a little to the left, approaching the monument to motherhood. It was a statue of a woman surrounded by her young children. I understood that she meant La Nuevera's children who were still young in age, but with a sacred destiny. And just ahead, there was a painter painting, as the father does with life, La Creación. I thought. Afterward, the sister of Mexican identity, who couldn't join us this time, told me that only men should play the caracal, because the caracal is a symbol of the female vagina. Although I wanted to think that she was referring to the power to vibrate the spirality of the universe, our universal mother. And only prepared and unified women, their perfect complement, or in a very necessary moment, could play it. Shortly after, we began walking toward the main square, next to Mérida's cathedral. We shared this joy with my wife, enjoying the sight of body jewelry like bracelets, necklaces, and talismans sold specifically in this downtown location. It was the moment when my brother and his girlfriend caught up with us. The three women, and especially one of them, couldn't resist the urge to brag a little about the recent events that had occurred in their absence, and as I had already told them about the recent telepathic message I had received, my disciples began to lash out at them amid laughter and merriment. "We've already wrapped up the pilgrimage work and everything," I spoke to the brother, telling him to look for the Lord of the Snails, so that he could assist me in the snail calls towards the 4 cardinal points. He quickly went to look for him, but he couldn't find him. It was as if it had been a dream, and the man had never been there. Everything changed quickly, especially in experiences like these. Without a second thought, I wanted to lend him my snail, and I told him to stand in the center of the main square, trying to play it. He managed to get some sounds out of it, but I wanted it to be perfect. The sound improved a little more. People walked past him, busy buying some sweets and desserts that the street carts were selling in various places on the plain in front of the cathedral. Americo Living Trail 448. After strolling and joking around, we decided it would be nice to eat something other than just snacks. So, we chose the cafe on the far right past where we had previously seen the snail man, and then the maternity monument. This is where Café de Pan Contreras used to be. This place had outdoor seating, and that's where we settled in. Without suggesting it, one of the sisters orders a Mayan coffee, and a few minutes later a waiter appears with some objects, such as a mobile table, a lit lighter, substances, etc., and before our eyes, with great skill, begins to prepare the special coffee, using live fire. Everyone in the group somehow sensed that this was something more than just a simple, everyday act of magic and fire. The waiter is very skilled, and seems used to this type of request. But this moment didn't seem ordinary to me. The sister tries the coffee, and can't resist the urge to share it, so we all try this Mayan coffee which, partly because of our happy mood, seemed more like a creamy elixir. My wife, or someone in the group, commented that this was actually a pact between everyone through that drink. For my part, I couldn't help but understand the indisputable. It was wine as a compliment to the bread of Christ, but this time not as a crucifixion, but only in a psychological mental real sense. Like the resurrection, even my brother's human whims were granted regarding certain melodies they wished to hear. The local musicians were playing South American melodies, precisely where, according to Master de la Ferrer and other ascended ones, the future destiny of the human race is headed. My wife wanted to listen to the piece of music called Alfonsina, and when we were standing up to leave it started playing. This seemed more like a mystical, Neptunian, drunkenness mixed with childish whims. Then, hastily, the brother of the group, to satisfy his girlfriend, also a priestess of our order, went and asked for a carnavalito to be played. The musicians dedicated it especially to us, and that's how we finally retired to our hotel. We slept again that night, only a few hours in my case, barely 3. I dreamed of sacred ruins and a sublime activity that never fades. As soon as I wake up, as is my custom, I get up to meditate, drink a liter of water, exercise, and perform the corresponding hatha yoga postures. Then, with a serene joy, I begin to dress again, with a jacket and tie. We met with the brothers at the ranch. Some were slower to arrive, and we waited until the last minute. But they finally showed up. Americo Living Trail 449. From Riga to Mexico City. We had to take a taxi to the airport. Our time was measured almost chronometrically, and the taxi had a civil band system, that is, connected to the other taxi drivers in Mérida. It seemed to me to be very Iranian intercom style. What particularly struck me was that the taxi, as we turned the first corner, passed by a warehouse that had a large title on its entrance, where it was clearly written, "The New World." Not only was this message special, with regard to the closing of the pilgrimages, but I also inevitably and instantly remembered that Maestro Estrada was born in the Nuevo Mundo colony. We rushed into the airport, searching for and lining up in our corresponding line, to present our tickets to the lady in charge. For a moment, it seemed like time was winning. But little by little, as the procedures got underway, we regained our breath and our good mood. We were in the waiting room, and I'm glad to be here dressed in a suit, especially my sunglasses. Then I open my book Christian line and read. Every time Estrada presented an initiatory symbol, a scandal would arise and the dualistas, the estradistas, the Ferrarists would emerge. I'm living my last moments as master, now you are responsible for the mission. You can call yourself master, maestro, venerable superior. This is an Estrada document, understand that. I lend the book to my wife, in case she wants to open it at random. She accepts and shows me the page where it says the consolidation stage begins when Uranus enters Aquarius, January 1996, and is reaffirmed in March with beneficial influences between Uranus, the Sun, Jupiter, Mars, etc. Individuals emerge from all lines in a happy medium. There are those who come from below, but are really already from above, and others recognized as part of the hierarchy, but who are really from below. Thus will the biblical precept be fulfilled, the last will be first and the first will be last. Magna Charta's Flight 461 departs. I'm assigned to seat 22, like Grand Arcanum 22. We were about 10 minutes into the flight, and my wife, who's standing by the airplane window, gets restless and points to me in the distance, explaining that below the plane, its shadow is reflected right inside a large rainbow-colored ring, here among the clouds. I couldn't help but remember the biblical and prophetic passage for these times that says, Americo Living Trail 450, and he will come on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, Matthew 24:30. We crossed the Gulf of Mexico, heading east toward Mexico City. Aware of what the biblical Gospels also explain in this regard. And he shall pass like lightning from the east to the west, Matthew 24:27. Mark 14:62. Matthew 26:64. We left Mérida at 10:40 a.m. We arrived in Mexico City without incident, and said goodbye to the brothers, aware of having shared something truly special. I didn't want to take a taxi inside the airport, as fares can be unreasonably triple. So I preferred to walk to the nearest avenue, loaded with regular but cumbersome suitcases. Once there, we hailed an ordinary taxi. The driver found the city empty, and with very little traffic. He was honest, driving at high speed and safely. And in record time, he dropped us off at the door of our apartment. I look at my watch and it's 12:40. That's 2 hours from the plane's departure in Mérida to our front door. We've definitely arrived at a destination like a bolt of lightning. Uranus rules Aquarius, and in the horoscope symbolizes the instantaneous. For my part, I was still trying to assimilate the set of experiences that life had offered and asked of me. On the night of August 10th, before the total solar eclipse, which would be almost at dawn on the 11th, one of the sisters who had gone to Mérida informed me by phone that Sister Rihanna had been given every opportunity to undertake a trip to Yucatan and visit 7 sacred centers in this region. In addition to waiting for the moment to give me the ashes from the incense burner she used on our visit to Teotihuacan, it turns out that when she recently checked the incense burner and found it broken, and in Mexican tradition, it is known that when this happens, the instrument should no longer be used, and those ashes are sacred. He sent word to Sister Rihanna that she should not return the ashes to me, but that the rebirth of Ahimsa, the white bird, must be fulfilled, and that these ashes must be divided proportionally into 7, depositing each portion in one of the sacred centers that she visits. I suggest you reproduce the recent circular, which reports on the importance of the pilgrimages we made, and the total solar eclipse of August 11, 1999. I ask that you prepare 52 copies of this circular, and distribute 7 to each sacred center, 1 for yourself, and the other 2 to anyone you consider very special. On the television news that evening, it was announced that, in Mexico City, the vehicular traffic on Avenida 16 de September, Mexican Independence Day, will, starting on August 11th, run from east to west, starting from the Zocalo to Balderas, until it reaches Independencia. It is natural to relate this fact with what the Gospels mention. Americo Living Trail 451. It will pass like lightning from the east to the west on the day of the total solar eclipse, Matthew 24:27. And then, we can add that, in this change of vehicular and energy circulation, it departs from the imposing Tenochtitlan to head toward the liberation of the peoples. That is, that finally the route is not to Tenochtitlan, but is now leaving Tenochtitlan for the world. because Mexico is the land of the eagles, and although it was a corpse, nevertheless, it is reborn from its ashes. Matthew 24:28. Facts like this speak without words, if we are able to perceive them. On August 11, 1999, at the ceremonial we held, it comes out in La Biblia. To everyone who has, more will be given, but from those who do not have, even what they have, will be taken away. Luke 19:26. A New Panorama in The Return of the Messiah, by William Henry. Like many other scholars of the subject at the time, he speaks of the fact that we are living in messianic times, and with this total eclipse and the great celestial cross of Aquarius, the return of the Messiah is expected. The Savior who is destined to merge with humanity. It is also said that 1999 to 2012 is the period in which crucial spiritual transformations for humanity will take place. It also places great emphasis on Tula as the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And all its centers, called Tulas, are sacred centers that can be found on the planet. There it explains that in Tula, our thoughts, desires, and fears will instantly become reality, because what is in our hearts can no longer remain hidden. Only love can flow in Tula. Tula is what Jesus calls the kingdom of God. And it only takes one human being to flourish for the whole world to flourish. He tries to show that the Savior will die, but when the children of darkness believe they have conquered the earth, then the Messiah, the Savior, will reappear before the eyes of the entire world. At that moment, the millennium of peace will begin. Remember, for Nostradamus, the Savior will arrive in July 1999, accompanied by the Master of the Sacred Land, Tula. According to the teachings of the intimate relationship between the so-called celestial avatar and the earthly avatar, we can recognize that this refers to their return. The probable date is June 2002. He also comments that the Savior comes on a white horse, as noted in the book of Revelation in the Bible. Americo Living Trail 452. At this time, the Earth is approaching Tula, and this may, from a scientific point of view, have something to do with what North American astronomers have discovered near the center of the Milky Way, a black hole. That is, a zone where not even light escapes. As a science fiction hypothesis, it is thought that it could be a time machine that could provide access to parallel dimensions. It is at the center of the galaxy where this alternative called a white hole was discovered. That is why we talk about the wormholes in the universe, which lead us to Tula. Also known as Galaxy Gate, these are shortcuts that would allow for rapid and precise intergalactic travel. Going to the past or future, this is what Tula is all about. According to the Mayans, the 9 lords of time leave Tula, Talan, or Aztlan, and enter Earth to build Tulas. Aztlan means white place or well, home of herons. The heron is the bird of resurrection and ascension, or displacement to higher realms. The doctrines of Tula are those that keep us in balance and harmony with the spiritual sun and with ourselves. It turns out that it is the dolphin who guides souls to the sacred islands or Tula. And then also, he tells us about the fish or Vesica Pisces, which means to tie the knot. It then begins to refer to a mysterious and highly important theme throughout human history, and is recognized as the flower of life and the Merkaba. All of this is related to the order of Melchizedek. Somewhere in his study, William identifies Tula as the site of the double mountain. He emphasizes the importance of Sirius, connected to Tula, and now to our planet Earth. He mentions the immortal Master Thoth, who discovered a pattern or shape called the tetrahedron, which he received during his visit to Tula. Thus, the Great Pyramid is a Tula from which the tetrahedron shape is derived. Finally, William insists on affirming that the Savior will open the Room of Memories in August 1999, coinciding with the arrival of the sign of the Son of Man in the sky, so that Egypt has a prominent place in all this change. And that Quetzalcoatl left. He told the people that when he returned, he would come from the east, like the morning star. America, according to some, literally translated means, land of the feathered serpent. I mention what I read in this book, especially because a little later I was to meet a great master who, at the time of writing this, is still physically present in the United States and gives evidence of direct contact with Thoth. This master is called Brunvallo Melchizedek. Americo Living Trail 453. But before reaching this point, I realized that, as a living path, it was essential for me to continue with the process I was experiencing with my own order, which more than anything was serving to ground energies within me that I still could not understand, and above all, to know to what extent humanity needed a change and what conditions it was in, to be able to make it happen. Part 5. Merkaba and the Era of Peace. Introduction. In this fifth part, which we have titled Merkaba in the Era of Peace, perhaps the most esoteric part of my process as a living path is projected. First, because it concludes the 8th pilgrimage with the reviving of the birth of Huitzilopochtli in Coatepec, Veracruz. My wife and I visited this pilgrimage with our group, the Order of the Lesser Brothers, and where, in some way, the following of a Supreme Order of Aquarius with its institution, Great Universal Fraternity, Solar Line, is recognized, converted into a New Age church, in a religious way, because that is useful for the human majority. But as in every spiritual movement, it retains a more esoteric part with the rebirth of Huitzilopochtli, following what was initiated by Regina, the Queen of Mexico, see the book, Regina. And also, reviving the biblical story in the New Testament, of Peter as the elder brother and John, the younger brother. And that history repeats itself in the nascent age of Aquarius, to follow a line of initiates of a New Age order, only more esoteric. But the story of our work, Living Path, does not end here, but when Circular 22 ended, around the spring of 2000, where he explained these events referring to the 8th pilgrimage, and also the activation of the Triangle of Power, Coatepec Zimpazahuazico. By then, I had begun a series of messages entitled, Orientation Logs, in which I relate, among other things, the contact we had with the Merkaba meditation, taught by the Master Brunvallo Melchizedek in his workshops of the Flower of Life and Sacred Geometry. This contact, Americo Living Trail 454, began in the fall of 1999, or around September 22, 1999. And it was transcendental in my experience as an initiate and heir to a sacred initiatory tradition for the age of Aquarius. Basically, it was here where I was guided by our coach or Merkaba meditation instructor. My wife and I carried out the physical construction, in our house in Ecatepec, state of Mexico, of the so-called Metatron space, based on the geometric figure of the cube. This gave me access to a very esoteric energy management system, supported by Brunvallo Melchizedek himself, a North American master belonging to the Order of the Melchizedek, a very ancient order, mentioned since the time of Abraham. And it was based on this that, on May 1, 2000, contact was established between the Pyramid of Cheops in Egypt, Teotihuacan, and our house in Ecatepec, Wind Hill. But it doesn't end here, and in this work, revised in 2017, I allow myself to add 2 other very important experiences. The first is mentioned at the beginning of my book, Reflections of a Guru, where it is established that our planet descended from the 3rd to the 4th dimension at the autumn equinox of 2008. And then, later, at the autumn equinox, but in 2010, the first Chamber of Secrets was founded in Tijuana, Baja California. This event is detailed in the book, Mission Tijuana. And finally, I presented written audio, the video uploaded to the internet in 2011, which I titled, Apostolic Succession in the New Age. It gives an idea of both my relationship with my wife and my feelings regarding the avatars of the age of Aquarius. Basically, I realized that the White Brotherhood of a planet, formed by the Ascended Ones, who are the internal government of that planet, must always be respected. According to the Galactic Federation and even higher authorities, it is an internal government that must be respected. Under the circumstances of their own historical and spiritual development, they establish, at the beginning of each zodiacal age, who the envoys, avatars, of said age will be, which occurs approximately every 2,000 years. This is why they have established who the avatars of the age of Aquarius, which we have already entered, will be, as well as their mechanisms of apostolic succession during it. All of which means, that we are part of a great plan, and, therefore, simply universal servants. This is how I want to complete my present work till Hidalgo and prelude to a new stage. Dream of promoted Moria and visit to Tila. I had concluded my pilgrimages in this unusual and gratifying way. And these days I had the dream that, as before, referred to a struggle with fanciful deceptions within my mind, that prevented me from approaching true consciousness on the inner planes. One of these times, a man with a harmonious body and sweet gaze appeared to me in my dream, but consciously. He told me he was an angel who had come to warn me to beware of Satan, because he was ready to deceive us in everything. He was referring to my wife and me. Weeks passed, and then one day I was in these uncomfortable dreams, where a force was trying to oppose my true inner awakening.